Hey everyone, and welcome to this episode to Chet Chat. So before we tell you about the exciting episode that we have lined up for you, please press that bell icon that you see on the screen so you get a notification on your phone every time we come online, and press that subscribe button and follow us at Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at Chet Chat 101. And for today's episode, we're going to talk about leadership and motivation lessons from the Army. A lot of you have written to me saying that we want to hear leadership lessons from someone, and I thought there can be no better person than Major General Neeraj Bali, who's a veteran from the Indian Army. He's also the CEO of Rodic Consultants, which is an engineering consulting company, and he's a prolific speaker and a wonderful human being. So let me introduce you to Major General Bali. So Major General Bali, thank you so much for coming all the way from Delhi to be with us on Chet Chat.
Thank you.
Privileged to have you on the show with us.
The pleasure's all mine.
We've been wanting to do a show on leadership, and we said leadership is equal to army. So, this just seemed like the most appropriate topic to talk about with you. But tell us, what is so special that the army is like the special training ground for leadership?
Well, first of all, let me say this without any ambiguity that army is not the only place where you find leadership. Indeed, leadership is found right from when the students are, say, somebody's captaining a basketball team or in charge of a cultural event. You require a whole lot of leadership. Leadership is in every walk of life. Having said that, there is something at play in the armed forces. When you have to lead people, your soldiers, to a point where they must follow you implicitly, right, even at the cost of losing their life or their limb, surely there is a different class of leadership at play. And I'm not just talking about battles. Even on a very routine basis, the areas like Siachen and deserts and extremely difficult terrain and circumstances where people have to be led all the time and done so well.
Right.
Perhaps the armed forces know a few secrets. And the last point I want to make is, now that I'm in the corporate sector, all this is done in the armed forces without the promise of any compensation, financial compensation.
Yes.
And the moment you step out, you think everyone talks about financial compensation. And so, because of these reasons, I think people world over turn to the armed forces to learn about leadership.
So as you know, a lot of students are watching our show today. So based on your vast experience with the Army, what would be your top 3 suggestions for them to hone their leadership skills?
Well, top 3. I would say at top of the pack every time is that if you want to be a leader, you've got to learn to lead by example.
Right.
There is no getting away from it. If somebody is not prepared to put his money where his mouth is in terms of example, then this talk or any other lesson of leadership is not for him or her. Look at our own lives. Eventually, children don't do as they are told to do even by their own parents. They do what the parents do.
Yes,
so setting the example, being consistent about the example all the time is the number one suggestion I would have. The second is that beyond the academic learning, you've got to learn how to motivate people. Unless you know that secret sauce of what makes people follow you willingly, enthusiastically and implicitly, you're not going to get there. The third thing that I've arrived at in my own life is that unless you understand what your role in life, your role is, you might not end up doing the right thing. For example, if you're a student who thinks your role is to come to the class, make sure you get enough attendance, be well behaved and pass your exams, you're going to conduct yourself in a certain way. But if you think you're a student who's going to make a difference, who's going to really excel, who's going to reach the top of the heap and follow some of your iconic examples, you're going to conduct yourself very differently.
Right.
Same goes for the teachers for that matter. The teacher who comes to the class saying, I'm going to cover my syllabus and I'll make sure the class behaves well and that's it, is different than a teacher who decides that she's going to change the lives of the students.
Yes.
So I think that understanding of what your role is may sound a little pedantic, but it's extremely important.
So these were wonderful 3 points that you shared with us. And you've had a vast leadership experience yourself. So talking about the first one, leadership by example, would you like to share something from your own personal story for our students?
There would be several, but the one that comes to my mind is, it goes back in 1997. The militants blew an improvised explosive device, which is like a mine, remotely controlled under the surface, and blew up one of my vehicles. The vehicle went up in the air above the eucalyptus trees, took two tumbles and crashed down on the track. The crater was about 8 feet deep, so that's the amount of explosive there was. It instantly killed a major and two soldiers, and wounded one lieutenant and two other soldiers very badly. Now, I had just gone over that same patch 10 minutes before that, and I heard this bang. We turned around, and then we were advised to go on foot, not knowing how many more such devices there might be. So we were running back towards the site. I could hear gunfire. The militants were firing at that mangled heap of vehicle, trying to kill everybody else. And these injured soldiers were firing back. So as we were running back, there was an officer, a major, who told me, he said, "Sir, you know these red colored collar tabs you wear as a senior officer that you may have seen, and the ranks? Actually, in battle, you're not supposed to wear all that, because then you're marked by the enemy as the leader and you're knocked off." So he said, "Sir, I think you should take this off. We are going where the firing is going on." I said, "All right, I will," but I didn't immediately act on it. We ran a few more steps, and on my left was a barber from the army, a guy by the name of Rooplal, who turned to me and said, "Can I say something?" I said, "Yeah, sure." He said, "Sir, what the major said is absolutely right. There's no courage in wearing these badges of rank into battle. You get killed, and then what happens? But I have an advice, sir. Now that we have lost a few people, don't take these off for 3 more months. Set an example to the men that you command that we are not shaken, that we will continue to risk our lives no matter what." I give you this story both to tell you what leading by example really is, and also to tell you how deeply ingrained it is in the fabric of the culture of the army, that
Even the barber understands it.
Tells you a story, gives you a narrative, a lesson that as a CEO you expect from your next guy as your vice president. You know, you've got to continue to consistently lead no matter what the risk you're facing.
Right. And talking about motivation, I know the story you mentioned is not only about leading by example, it's also very motivating to the people that you turned around, you walked back, you didn't delegate, you didn't say, "Okay, I'm sitting in the commanding room and I'm observing what's happened. You guys go on the ground and see." You led by example, you went right there. So that is motivating by itself. But talking about
suppose so, from your point of view, I suppose so. But that's what every single commanding officer of the Indian Army would do. That's part of the culture.
Right.
So while fascinating as that story might be, I suppose the students would want to know what should they do in their own lives, what yardstick should they adopt for leading by example. The yardstick you must adopt is that you must work harder than the people you command. You must take greater risks than the people you command at all times. In fact, you can Google and see what the Shetwood motto in the army is, and I'm not going to repeat it. But if you are, for example, a basketball team captain and your team does 10 rounds of a ground to warm up, you ought to be doing 15 every single time. Secondly, you cannot set an example unless you understand your men, you understand the people you command. So you must pay a lot of attention, not just to their motivation in terms of money, but where they come from.
Right, and that's beautiful because the army is sort of, known for the diversity. People coming from different walks of life, different parts of the country, different religions or whatever, and yet united in a cause.
Yes.
And at no point do you see that difference between two soldiers.
Absolutely.
Though they may be coming from two different poles.
Absolutely.
So talking about your second idea of motivating people, I do understand leading by example itself is a big motivation for people. But since you specifically mentioned that would be your second leadership lesson, we'd love to have a story on that.
Yes, sure. There are many clues I can give to a student on what you should do to motivate others. But not surprisingly, the first one is still leading by example.
Right, of course.
That's the way you go. For example, you hear about news from J&K every now and then where we neutralize militants, but we also end up losing people. We have casualties. You might notice that every single time you hear a news like that, you would find that among the casualties, usually there's an officer. How is it that when the ratio of the officers as men is vastly different, that it is the officers every single time you find that news? The fact of the matter is, because they are leading absolutely from the front on their own, no matter what the risks there are. In 1998, a BBC team came to my unit and they wanted to film us. They had been given permission to film a live operation. And when the live operation was we were about to go in, the producers noticed that I wasn't wearing a bulletproof jacket. So he asked me, why aren't you wearing one? Now remember, this is about more than 2 decades ago when the Indian Army was still procuring equipment. Today we have enough of everything. Not every soldier had a bulletproof jacket on.
Right.
So I said, look around. It's not just me. No officer is wearing a bulletproof jacket because we will not protect ourselves more than we protect our men. So you really have to go to those levels of ensuring that people look at you and feel motivated. But eventually, beyond these stories, it is all about creating the right environment.
So, sir, you just mentioned about creating the right environment for motivating people. And also that you've got these large-sized teams, particularly in the army. You've got large-sized teams, people are spread out at different parts, they're not necessarily physically also in the same territory as you all the time. So how do you create that environment? How do you devise a mechanism to keep getting feedback, to know exactly, like you said, you must know the people that you're leading.
Right.
So you need to devise those mechanisms. How does that work?
Right. The first question is possibly the key. How do you create the right environment? We all work under greatly stressful situations, whether it's in the corporate sector or in the government or in the army. And people make mistakes.
Right.
The first and the foremost thing that a student must learn as he grows up, how to deal with mistakes. Do we simply overlook them and keep people happy? Or what do we do? Now the answer coming from the army is this. You got to learn to categorize the mistakes. Okay. If the mistake is one of intention, where a man has gone out and done something wrong purposefully, he's made money, he's done something else, there has got to be absolutely no excusing him.
Right.
Then there are mistakes out of laziness, which are the bulk of them. Mistakes of omission. Right. Somebody had to do something and didn't do it. Those mistakes too should be dealt with by giving a rap on the knuckles, some training, some briefing, and if it occurs again and again, then of course a different call can be taken. But sizable mistakes are mistakes of judgment, where in your absence, a team member will take a call, he will make a decision which may not agree with the way you were thinking.
Right.
That's the one that you need to absolutely overlook. That you may, of course, retrain or rebrief the person later, but you must always overlook errors of judgment.
Right.
If you don't do that, it is akin to wanting to rear tigers, but actually treating people like rabbits on a daily basis. Let us say, as a student, you are in charge of a cultural event, and the professor in charge doesn't let you move a step. And any decision you take, he says, I wish you had asked me.
Right.
Are there any chances that on the last day, if there's a crisis, would you take initiative? Chances are no. You look over your shoulder. So this is a hard thing to do, but you must do. The second one is more on both on a practical and a spiritual plane. You've got to take care of your ego. If you have a large ego, you might become a great manager, a good manager. You might become a reasonable leader. But chances are that you probably will never become a great leader. Right. So you've got to become forgiving, large-hearted, less judgmental, and so on and so forth. And this is a whole new topic, so I'm not going to...
No, but it's important. Being part of a leader is also being a role model. People must, take to you. They must like you as a person. It is important.
Yes. And then, like you said, you need feedback.
Right.
What is it that stops people from giving you the right feedback? Simply standing on a pulpit and saying, please come to me, is not going to help.
Sure.
First and foremost, you must learn to listen and see very carefully. And do what the army leaders do or the army commanders do. They don't wait for men to speak, because that may not happen. They go out to the field, they talk to people, and they elicit answers and questions, and then they address them. So that's the first thing that you need to really do. The second is that you must reward candor. It's again very hard to do, but we have a culture in the army that you have a bada khana when you sit with men and eat, and sometimes a man will say something slightly out of the line because he's had a drink and he wants to talk to you. The army culture says, listen to him. He's telling you the truth.
Right.
So reward candor and don't get hurt by someone saying something that you don't like to hear. The third is that if you get complaints against your company or against someone, treat that complaint as a friend.
Right.
Don't get overly het up and excited about the language or what's been written, usually a person takes a lot of trouble, before he writes a complaint.
Right.
So take out the truth from it, and that's what you do. The last point, which is not so much about the feedback, but about motivation, is you've really got to understand the people you command. And you must understand, especially in the corporate sector, that people don't always get motivated only by money.
Absolutely.
And yet we go on harping on that subject.
Yes.
If that was true, then how is it that people in the armed forces, coming from the same very backgrounds, behave differently?
Right.
There are a lot of people who work for self-respect more than money. Money is a factor always. There are people who work for their sense of identity.
Right.
There are people who actually love their jobs.
Right.
There are people who cannot think of being anything else. I mean, look at your own colleges and your schools, and there would be a peon or there would be someone working there who's a legend,
Right.
who's an icon, because he loves his work. So people sometimes are looking you to pay attention to that part and not just promotions and money. So all of that as a package is what helps you understand how to motivate people.
I'm a forces daughter myself. My father was in the Air Force, so I completely relate to and I'm inspired by what you've said. But before we cap the show, is there one piece of advice that you'd like to give our students?
Yes, I would love to give a piece of advice that I have always given my own sons, who fortunately have taken it. It is this: read. It doesn't matter what you read, but read. And I'm not talking about imbibing knowledge from television or looking at your phone screen. That may be all right, but read proactively and gradually lift the game of what you read. Now, why am I linking this with leadership? Unless you have excellent communication skills, unless you can understand another human being, unless you can understand the nuance of life, you probably cannot make a connection that a leader should make with a variety of people. Like you just said, there's a diversity of people in the army, so you're really coming from different backgrounds. So in order to master all that, there is no advice I will give more than this: read. How much should you read? 15 minutes a day. That's all that you need to do to get better than the other guys. The second piece of advice I would give is work on your interpersonal skills. You'll be surprised how many students are simply not employable for want of this. And interpersonal skills will of course help you in getting employment, but it will also help you in becoming a good leader. And the last piece of advice would be good at what you do. Don't let someone give you a different narrative. If you're not good at what you do, even if you're not a good dad, chances are you won't be respected. So be good at what you do, and you could possibly become a good leader. All the best.
Thank you so much, sir. That was absolutely beautiful and motivating and inspiring.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for calling me here. Thank you.
And thank you so much for watching till the end. And remember that bell icon that you need to press to get your notifications, and the subscribe button at the bottom that you need to press as well. And if you have any questions that you want to ask me, you want to ask Major General Bali, put everything down in the comment section below this video, and like us at Facebook at Chet Chat 101, at Twitter at Chet Chat 101, and at Instagram at Chet Chat 101. And happy watching!